This is Beta from Tower of God, a character who embodies the very essence of a tragic villain. His story is one of torment and overwhelming sense of abandonment. Beta was created as part of an experiment by the mad scientists of the workshop to become a living ignition weapon, a fate that left him filled with anger and hatred towards those who played with his life. Today we are continuing our journey through Tower of God's most iconic villains by diving into Beta's tragic backstory and unpacking what makes him one of the most sympathetic villains in the Tower of God series. So let's find out where Beta will land in our ultimate villain tier list. As always, I will be ranking him based on 3 key factors: his motivation, the threat he poses, and of course how entertaining he is as a character. But before that, I have to talk about Enryu for a bit, or to be more precise, about the thorn he left behind after killing the administrator of the 43rd floor. That thorn is said to have the power to kill Jihad, so at some point Fuck gained possession of one of the thorn fragments. However, no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't use it. Although it was an ignition weapon, it was a hollow and dead shell, so Fuck decided to join hands with the workshop. That's when the workshop started to kidnap kids from the middle area to carry out their research. The research to turn a human into an ignition weapon, and that is where Beta comes in. So let's start by examining his motivation. Much like Beniamino Casano and Horian, Beta also underwent and endured countless experiments along with many other children by the hands of the workshop, until only 5 remained. He considered these other survivors friends or even family. But one day, a workshop researcher gathered them into one place and told them to kill each other. The survivor would become a complete ignition weapon and would gain freedom. That one word drove them all insane, and in the end Beta was the one who survived. However, his body became unable to get through a single day without the workshop's drugs. The freedom he was promised was a lie. Beta's entire existence was shaped by the abuse and torment inflicted upon him by the workshop. He was made into a tool of destruction, someone who was denied everything. And that loss of freedom is at the core of his motivation. Beta hates Fuck and everyone connected to them, so he wants everyone to feel the same pain he did. This is why he has such a deep hatred for Balm. But what really drives him is the deep-seated desire to reclaim his freedom. His deep hatred stems from the fact that he was robbed of his humanity. In a way, Beta doesn't want to be a villain. He wants to be free, to escape the chains that bind him. This motivation is tragic, but it makes Beta incredibly sympathetic, even as he takes on the role of an antagonist. But things start to change for Beta after the workshop battle arc, and this is where we see his path towards redemption. During the battle, Beta is forced to confront Balm, who represents everything he was denied: freedom, friendship, and the ability to choose his own destiny. Initially, Beta hates Balm, seeing him as someone too naive to understand the world's cruelty. But over time, and especially after he was shown a bit of kindness, Beta begins to question his purpose and his own hatred. Unlike many villains who continue down their destructive path, Beta begins to change after the workshop battle. Instead of lashing out, he starts to shift his focus from revenge to something much deeper: redemption. Beta's interaction with Balm and his companions slowly chip away at his hardened exterior. He starts to question the role Fuck forced upon him, and for the first time, Beta begins to seek out a purpose beyond simply destroying those who wronged him. His role in Balm's journey becomes more complex as he moves away from being a traditional villain to a more nuanced character. Now, when it comes to threat level, it's hard to judge Beta's strength, as he is introduced very early on in the story and obviously does not possess the same strength as a ranker, and we haven't seen him go all out in a while. However, Beta is no pushover. He's a living ignition weapon. He's extremely dangerous, capable of wielding powerful Shinsu-based abilities that could easily overwhelm even skilled opponents. His power is directly tied to the ignition weapon inside him, giving him a devastating strength. However, what's important to remember here is that Beta is not as interested in raw destruction as much as he is in using his abilities to lash out at those responsible for his suffering. He is driven by vengeance and survival, which makes him a more focused threat than some of the more chaotic villains in the series. When he was first introduced, he was a remarkable entity. Being a living ignition weapon, Beta possesses powers that match and even exceed many E-rank regulars. He is shown to have a high level of speed. By his own admission, he still doesn't know the limits of his speed. Beta is also able to manipulate his power as a living ignition weapon that he uses to fire massive Shinsu blasts and barriers to protect himself from similar attacks. He is also shown to have a high level of intellect, as shown when he managed to trick all the workshop guards about his whereabouts, and also when he predicts Kun's plan of summoning Viol during the workshop battle. Also, unlike that of Hor-Yang and Kasano, who both formerly had half of a devil inside of them, Beta might have a complete devil inside him. Beta seems to be more or less unaffected by the flow or pressure of Shinsu, as seen towards the end of the Floor of Death arc, when the Red Frisser tried to suck up all the Shinsu. While this had an effect on the likes of Kun and Dorsey or even Yuri, Beta was able to move around and use his abilities, seemingly with no issues. But let's talk entertainment value. And this is where Beta shines. His tragic backstory combined with his internal struggle makes him a fascinating character to watch. He's not just a mindless villain, he's someone who constantly wrestles with his own pain and trauma, which gives his every action emotional weight. Every time Beta appears on screen, you can feel the tension, the anger, bubbling just beneath the surface, ready to erupt at any moment. It's this emotional complexity that makes Beta such an interesting villain to me. So where does Beta fall in our ultimate villain tier list? His motivations are deeply tragic, his threat level is respectable, and his emotional journey makes him incredibly entertaining to watch. However, what holds Beta back from reaching the upper tiers is the fact that his role in the larger story is relatively brief. Despite this, Beta's presence in Tower of God leaves a lasting impact, and his tragic nature elevates him above many of the more one-dimensional antagonists, which is why Beta earns a solid B tier ranking. He's not a world-shattering threat, but he's a villain with emotional depth and a heartbreaking story that resonates with me. But what do you think? Let me know where he ranks in your list. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe to my channel. Also check some of my other content out as well. I'm Dennis, and as always, thank you for watching and I hope to see you again. Bye!